Welcome to Crime Most French, a weekly podcast taking you through intriguing cases carried out on French soil. Researched and narrated by Cedric and rudely interrupted by me, Melanie. We're the true crime podcast All the Lions. Crack open le vin and let the mayhem commence.
The case this week takes us to Paris on the 25th of September 1933, when the body of Oscar Dufrenne is found in his office in the Palace, which is a very famous dance hall in Paris. The police tries to solve the murder for several years, but spoilers, it's an unsolved murder.
Oh, how hugely frustrating.
Yes, especially when you see why it's unsolved. Oscar Dufrenne was the manager of the Palace. The Palace was a very well-known and successful music hall. In the 1920s, it was the first place where a totally naked woman danced on stage.
Oh, risky.
Classy.
I guess Josephine Baker was kind of like...
Yeah, she wasn't naked, though.
No, she had her bananas on, but yeah, she had her bananas out, though.
Yes. The press at the time absolutely hated it, obviously, especially the far-right press. But the hall was full every night.
Of course. Full of people that...
Nobody goes, but it's full.
Full of people. I would never know anybody who would go.
Exactly. On the 25th of September 1933, the accountant of the palace knocks at the door of Oscar. It's about 20 past midnight. The cinema has closed for the day, and like every night, he comes upstairs to say goodbye and go home.
Okay.
He gets no answer. He opens the door and finds the room in the dark, complete darkness.
That just feels ominous.
He finds it very strange because he was supposed to be there, and he's there every day. And on that day, the room is just dark. So he's worried. He calls for help. One of the people he calls is Henri Varnat, who's one of Oscar's associates.
Okay.
He comes quickly with some light, and he brings with him the projectionist from the cinema.
I take it is the main overhead light. Is it not working?
Obviously not, because they had no light with them. So they had to go and get some light. So I would assume it's not working.
Yeah, it's definitely ominous.
When they go back in, they find a grisly scene. They see a puddle of blood on the floor. They see a mattress on top of an old rug next to the desk.
Wow.
Henri Varnat pushes the mattress, unfolds the rug, and discovers Oscar's lifeless body, half naked, rolled in the rug.
That's not good.
That is not good, especially for Oscar.
Yeah.
Oscar had started work as a stage builder. He's described in some newspapers as hammerer, so just there to hammer nails.
Okay, so he was making the scenery.
Yes, he was making the scenery. He started at the bottom, really. You can't really go lower than that. Then he became an actor for a short while, and eventually became manager of a number of very famous, pretty successful theaters, cinemas, casinos, pretty much everything that entertainment had at the time.
So he was more successful out of the limelight than in.
Yes, he was. One of the places he managed was the Palace, where his office was, which was at the time famous, still exists today, and still very successful today. Another one was the Bataclan, where some killing has happened a few years ago in Paris.
Oh yeah, the November terrorism attacks. Yeah.
Also, another one was the Empire, which is probably the biggest and most famous of the theaters in Paris, outside the classical ones like Garnier.
Yeah.
The only way to get there is to be already very famous and very successful. So only the very big, like comedians and whatever, manage to book the Empire.
I think London has a big Empire. Isn't there one at Hackney or something? The Empire at Hackney.
I don't know.
Vaguely rings a bell.
It would be similar to the Apollo, really, but much
the
bigger
Hammersmith Apollo,
than the Apollo, because you get thousands of people in there. Yeah. So similar to that. You don't get to the Apollo when you're a starter unless it's something special.
Yeah, they don't do open mic nights at the Apollo.
Exactly. Yeah. Along with his management job, he's a councillor for the 10th district of Paris. He's also a councillor for the Seine department, which became in the 70s Paris.
Okay.
He's president of the Theatre Manager Union, and he's an agent for a number of soon-to-be famous, some already famous singers at the time.
He's like one of these people that the more he does, the more he kind of like he seems to be able to do. He was doing the job of about 3 people.
Yes, yeah. He was everywhere.
Mm.
And he was, of course, very well known.
Mm-hmm. I guess that would have probably made him a target if he was successful. And
Well, yeah, yes, but really it's business, so you don't normally kill the people who compete with you. Normally you don't.
Not normally, no, that's very true.
So to those who discovered the scene in the office, and for the police who arrived about 10 minutes later, there's no doubt he's been assassinated. He didn't fall, roll in the rug, covered himself with the mattress.
Yeah.
Oscar was openly gay.
Mm.
In itself, it wasn't taboo at the time because the 20s had been round. That contributed in part to how much and what kind of coverage what happened in the press, because the right and far right press essentially was talking only about that, not that much about the murder itself.
So unlike in the UK where it was actually illegal and you could go to jail for being a homosexual, there wasn't any of that in France, but it still wasn't seen as being hugely socially acceptable.
Well, it wasn't illegal, and it really depended on who you were talking to. The left, for example, and the left newspapers had no problem with it.
Okay.
It's really the right and the far right
That saw it as being a bit deviant.
Well, the traditional Christian Catholic related parties and press really had a problem with that, but the rest of the
man
population
lying
didn't.
with man thing.
Yeah,
never really gels well.
exactly.
Right.
So that contributed to keep the story in the press constantly for about 2 years.
Yeah, but for the wrong reason.
For the wrong reasons, but at the same time, it also kept it going because it might have died if it didn't happen.
Yeah, I guess so.
Also, one of the things is there's obviously a sexual content to the scene because Oscar is found with his trousers and boxer shorts down to his knees. So he's half naked. His shirt is open, covered in blood. But strangely, his jacket is neatly folded on the chair under the window.
Right.
So
he definitely got
he
caught in the act.
Undressed voluntarily, really. So that's why they're talking about it in the press. It's not obvious at the time whether he had sex with someone. They couldn't tell at the scene. It's the coroner that would have to decide if it happened or not. The context of that whole case attracts attention the wrong way and also moves the police to the wrong place or in the wrong direction.
Right.
Because first of all, because he was homosexual, they decided that pretty much any homosexual in the area was a suspect, which was stupid because that's pretty much the whole clientele of the place.
Yeah.
So they started looking at that and then decided, no, that's too many people. So they gave up, but they wasted a number of days just being stupid.
Presumably also that has quite a higher count of homosexuals who work in the theatre. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
The coroner that comes later in the morning, I think he arrived at about 4 a.m, so we're talking 3.5 hours later or so, says that the body is cold but still bendy, so he places the time of the murder to 10 to half 10 the previous evening. He also notes lots of cuts on the head and blood spatter on the walls and on the ceiling.
So quite a violent death.
Clearly that was a violent attack, yes. And also we can probably rule out a woman.
Yeah, I guess so.
So, of course, that fitted with the narrative.
And that it was a homosexual.
The police, exactly, the police and some newspapers had. The police also discover a wet towel in the sink, which was stained with blood.
But whose blood?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the question is, did the murderer cut himself? Or did the murderer just wash his hand after he had killed Oscar?
That's quite common, isn't it? If you've got multiple stab wounds, that the person who's doing the stabbing gets injured as well.
Yeah. But at the time, they don't know. And now it would be a great piece of evidence.
Piece of evidence.
Most likely there would be DNA from both of them on it. But of course, at the time, there's no such thing.
Alas, it doesn't
And
exist in the 30s.
so they don't do anything with it, really. At most, they could have got a blood group, but really, that
What's that
narrows
gonna
down to a
show
few
you?
million people, so it's not
Yeah.
really significant. Very soon, the police decide that the motive for the murder is theft, because Oscar's wallet is missing,
Right.
and according to his secretary, it routinely contained 1,000 francs or so. Also, his golden watch, which was a Swiss watch, a numbered Swiss watch, is missing as well.
Right.
And also, the secretary mentions that there's normally a golden fountain pen on the desk, which is also missing. So the police said, yep, that's theft. We know
Okay.
what it is.
Very flash, having a golden fountain pen. Slightly bling bling.
So after that, the investigation starts.
Okay.
And the first question the police tries to answer is, who did Oscar meet that evening? They interrogate his secretary, who's called Serge Niculescu. And he says that Oscar, his sister Sidonie, and another woman called Mademoiselle Casanova, that's her real name, had dinner at his place the night of the murder, and he drove back Oscar to the palace at about 9:30.
Right. So he was essentially the last person to see him.
He was.
Okay.
So he's obviously suspect number one at that
Yeah.
point.
Mhm.
He's sure that Oscar had no other appointment on that day. He
Right.
had no reason to see anyone else. And he's not aware that Oscar was using his office to meet men. Even though Oscar and Serge are known to have had a relationship.
Okay, so he was more than just his secretary then.
Well, he's kind of playing dumb and pretending that he doesn't know what's going on, but he
Okay.
was part of it. And it's the same for his associate Henri Varna as well. In fact, I remember when I read in the newspapers an interview with Serge, he was saying that he was interrogated by the police several times for many, many hours. And at some point, he realized that it wasn't an interrogation, it was an accusation.
Oh, okay.
And he refused to sign his declaration.
Mm-hmm.
So they wrote down everything he said and they said, sign it. And he said, I'm not signing it. You're accusing me of something.
Yeah. He went from being a witness to being a suspect very
Yeah.
quickly then.
But didn't tell him. He realized as they were asking questions. The police interrogates all the professional contacts that Oscar had, and they get the same answer. What? Oscar was a bit strange? Oscar was gay? No, I'm certainly not gay. I don't know what's going on there.
That sounds a bit suspicious.
Yeah, especially when it comes from associates that were known to everybody, including the police, to have a relationship with him.
Right.
But they all deny that anything is going on, that everything, they call it strange. Everything is strange. So clearly they're covering for him.
Yeah.
And it's understandable because even though the 20s had happened, in the 30s you don't necessarily want anybody or everybody to know that you're gay because there's still some stigmatism attached to it.
Yeah, yeah.
For Oscar, it wasn't a problem because he was working in the theater and he was his own boss. So he had no problem telling people, but for people involved with him or around him, it was a problem. So they all covered it. The newspapers learned in November, so that's 2 months later, that Henri Varna was the one who had orchestrated the denial from everybody. He had called everybody, he had people coming to his office, and he told them, you don't want Oscar's reputation to be tarnished by this, so don't mention it. Don't say anything. So they all do that, and at that point, the police is essentially hitting a wall.
Okay, because this coordinated pact of silence is kind of like hurting the whole investigation rather than...
They pretend that they don't know he's gay. They pretend they're not gay. They pretend they don't know who was involved with him. And most likely somebody knew who he was meeting. But because they don't want to admit knowing anything, then the police gets no information. So they're totally stuck at that point. The only one they eventually interview who candidly talks about it is Jean Sablong, who was a famous singer at the time, who also was openly gay, had no problem with it. So he talks to the police and says, yeah, he was homosexual, and yes, those people are too, and yes, they had relationships, and he essentially tells everything he knows about it. He also says, for example, that Serge and Oscar had a relationship, but it was kind of heaty sometimes, because Serge had a bad temper. So when Oscar was bringing new lovers around, he was having tantrums. And Jean Sablon says that at some point, Serge also bit Oscar because he was angry at him. So clearly there's some bad blood there.
That sounds like a very rocky relationship.
It is a very rocky relationship.
Really
yes.
rocky. It's more of a Mike Tyson kind of a relationship rather than rocky. That was a very bad pun. I apologise for that.
So of course the police says, yeah, we have another motive. So now they have several reasons why they're thinking that Serge is suspect number one. When interrogating again, and that happens 5 times,
okay,
he says that his relationship with Oscar has never been as good as it was. They had mended all their problems and they were working well together and had no problem.
Still, it's still quite a climb down from our relationship is fine to a bit easier to,
Yes.
everything's fine again.
Yes. And he denies the fact that Jean Sablong had said that Oscar had asked him to leave his job and go away, find another job. He says, no, that never happened. I was never asked to leave.
Do we know entirely what Jean Sablong's motivation for telling the story was as well? So
no, he's just mentioned at the
tell.
very start and then he disappears.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
No.
Serge says that the proof that everything is fine between him and Oscar is that he was at his place for dinner the night of the murder.
Well, yeah, you're not going to spend...
including Oscar's sister.
Yeah, you're not going to...
none of them mentioned anything was wrong.
No, you're not going to spend the night with the evening, socialising with somebody, take them to work and then murder them.
Yes, and also for Oscar, it doesn't make sense to spend the night with someone who he doesn't want to work with and obviously doesn't like.
No, and take him all the way to work. Oh, yeah, why not murder him, plop him in the Seine and then,
Yeah, so that's his argument. He's saying, it can't possibly be me.
No, seems a bit silly.
The police still doesn't believe him, but that's his argument at the time.
They don't really have any hard evidence, so...
No. The instructing judge, who's called Mr. Bru, is at first seen taking the case very, very seriously. He's everywhere. He interrogates the witnesses himself. He turns up unannounced in places where he wants to ask questions to people so they don't have time to prepare, and that happens to Serge several times.
Mm-hmm.
And he also goes to the music hall some nights to listen to people talk, just in case they mention things that would be useful for the investigation.
So he's super diligent then.
So he seemed to be taking it very seriously, yeah. Eventually, it's the cinema manager that admits that, yes, the evening of the assassination, Oscar was meeting someone in his office. He says that he saw a man arrive at about 10:15 p.m. and he was dressed as a sailor, and he had a note handwritten by Oscar to allow him in the theater. So finally some progress.
So we had one of the village people coming to visit, presumably.
Essentially, yes. So the police rounds up everybody again, and they interrogate everybody again, all those people who didn't remember anything or denied everything.
Mm-hmm.
They suddenly have a better memory, so they start remembering.
The collective amnesia has lifted.
Yes, it cured itself for everybody. So they do mention that, yes, a sailor was seen at the theater a few days earlier.
Right.
On the day of the murder, he came back, and he arrived in the theater mid-evening, probably about 9:45. And some say that his hat had no markings. Normally, sailors' hats have the name of the vessel they work on.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And they say that his had no markings at all.
Oh, okay.
So to me, that would mean that it's a costume, not a uniform.
Yeah, that's true.
But the police does not even entertain the idea that it might not be a real sailor. They decide from the very beginning that it's a real sailor. So when they're told, there's no markings, he can't be a real one, the cop in charge answers that in his 35-year career, he has never seen a fake sailor, so it has to be a real sailor. So they start looking for a sailor, obviously. And that's the only narrative that the police follows from now on, all the way to the end of the case.
I guess you could almost understand that if they were based somewhere near Toulon, but it's quite far from Paris. Surely there wasn't that many sailors wandering around the streets.
But there were two bases. The two main bases were Brest and Toulon.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, they're both quite far from Paris. But when sailors were on permission on land, it was very common that they traveled to places, especially Paris. They would just take the train and go to Paris.
Okay.
So it wasn't entirely surprising and not uncommon to see lots of sailors around Paris at the time.
I
Because the
see.
Navy was huge. The French Navy was the second largest navy in the world after the UK's one.
Okay.
And that's why when the Germans arrived in Toulon in 1943, the Navy sunk itself. Because they didn't want to become the Nazi Navy, because then the world would have been in trouble.
Yeah.
So all the vessels hundreds of vessels that were in Toulon all sunk on one night.
Oh dear.
And nobody knows who did it.
Carnage.
But yes, so yeah, there were lots and lots and lots of sailors around the country.
Okay.
The police invest a huge amount of time and resources trying to find that sailor. So they asked the Navy to give them the list of everybody that would match the description of the sailor they were given by people in the theater. So a tall guy, probably 1.77 m or so, with blue eyes, dark hair, as far as I remember. The Navy replies with 1,700 names.
Yeah, it's not exactly as if he was kind of like a midget with a hump. I mean, you're talking,
and
that could be anybody.
Yeah, and those 1,700 names are only the people who were actively in the Navy at the time, on permission at the time, and did match the description and could possibly be in Paris at the time. On a side note, it's not uncommon to see fake sailors around Paris, because sailors had a reputation for being at sea for long periods of time,
right,
and for being great lovers, especially gay lovers, and then leaving the next day without a trace. So they were great one-night stands.
So basically it was the shorthand.
Yes. So many fake sailors could be found around Paris, around clubs and this kind of stuff. But the police still refuses to accept that it's true. So they ignore that completely.
They don't seem very clued up on the whole culture.
No, they don't seem to be aware of the gay scene at the time.
No.
And even when they're told about it, they refuse to accept that it's true. As far as they're concerned, it doesn't exist.
Okay.
So, of course, if it wasn't a sailor, then they're doing work that's pointless.
Yeah, going off in the completely wrong direction.
Yeah, exactly. But because they never accept that it might be a fake sailor, they just don't try to find them.
Yeah.
They also investigate a pair of scissors that were allegedly on Oscar's desk normally, that are missing. And the police think at the time that maybe he was stabbed with those scissors because there was blood everywhere and cuts on the head and everything. So they think, oh, that's the crime weapon. So they're looking for that as well.
Right.
Unfortunately, eventually, the coroner publishes his report, and it contains a few surprises. One is that he was hit 17 times at the head with a very large tool.
Right.
He describes it as maybe something like a pickaxe handle.
Right. So something,
or baseball bat, essentially.
Yeah, something about the size of a baseball bat, presumably.
Yeah. But another surprise is that it's not what killed him. He died of suffocation in the drug.
That guy had a very hard head.
Yeah. So he was hit 17 times to the head,
Insane.
was leaking blood everywhere.
Yeah.
And he died because he was rolled in the rug.
That's a horrible way to go. I'm claustrophobic, but it's just horrible way to go.
Yes. And the last thing that the coroner says that's important in his report is that he had sex before he died. So clearly he got undressed voluntarily. Clearly he met someone for that in his office. So that confirms that part of the story.
There was definitely a meet and greet going on that obviously his secretary didn't know about.
His secretary knew about, but didn't want to admit it.
Oh, that's true.
Because he would have known anything that happened in that office, and certainly everything the cinema manager next door knew, because it's him who said he was meeting someone.
Okay, yeah.
Because,
well, he let him in, didn't he?
No, it was a woman, I can't remember her name, who let him in. And she was interviewed and she confirmed that, yes, he came, had a note, and she let him in. But Serge's office was just outside Oscar's office, so he would have known everything that was going on in there. So he was denying it for a very long time that it ever happened.
So we're thinking it might be likely that he picked up some guy who was dressed as a soldier. They came, they, did what they did, and then
something
he
happened.
Was robbed and just...
Yeah, he was robbed and killed for some reason we don't know. That's the story that people in the theater say happened.
Yeah.
But that's still not the story for the police.
They're still thinking it's a sailor.
They still think that the motivation is theft, and they
Yeah.
still think that it's an actual sailor.
Mm.
Yes. In October 1933, a man called Pierre confesses to Oscar's murder when he goes to the French consulate in Santander, in Spain.
Okay, yeah.
He explains that he's a deserter, and he fled his position in the Navy in Toulon.
Right.
He is therefore a proper sailor.
So he's checking off one of the things on the...
He's checking
yeah.
one of the things, yeah. Interestingly, it's Inspector Bonny of several affairs we've heard before, like the Landru and Sesnick affair,
Okay.
that is sent there to interview him.
Mm-hmm.
And we remember that he was a very dodgy, corrupt cop.
Dear.
In Spain, he meets him and
Right.
he interviews him. Then that's where things go wrong. First of all, he doesn't match the description that the sailor was given, that the police was given about the sailor in Paris.
Okay.
Because André is short, blonde, and blue eyes instead of tall, green eyes and dark hair.
Oh, I think you said blue eyes earlier. It's
Yeah,
green
blue eyes, yes. Blue eyes and dark hair.
Okay.
Yeah. So he doesn't match that description at all.
Right.
Because he's only 1.70 m.
Okay,
So he's
right.
quite short even at the time.
Yeah.
So that's the first sign that it's not him. Also, when Bonnie interviews him, he decides that he's just a crazy dude. He's just talking nonsense.
Yeah.
He doesn't know a number of things that he would have known if he had been there.
Well, we know when we hear of plenty of people who are admitting to crimes that they just didn't commit. It just seems to be something that some people do.
Yes. So like the scissors, like the sailor, like other things, it's another dead end.
Yeah, dear.
During the investigation, they identify one additional suspect.
Okay.
It's a sailor,
Right.
again, because you're looking for a real sailor,
Sailor, okay.
called Paul Labrie. And he seems to be one of Oscar's lovers. He's been seen around. He's known to the police because he's been sentenced for weapon charges, drug dealing, pimping, selling of stolen goods. So he's been around the police stations a few times.
Okay. He sounds like somebody you should be staying away from rather than getting involved.
Yes, he was a crook and a criminal.
Yeah.
But he had never killed anyone.
True.
So his main fault at the time was to be known to dress up as a sailor. So he
Right.
was an actual sailor, but he was also dressing up as a sailor.
Okay.
He had a thing about sailors, obviously.
Yeah, clearly.
And also, he disappeared the day after the murder. So the police can trace where he was and what he was doing up to the day of the murder, and then no trace. He's gone.
Okay. So alarm bells ringing.
Yeah, they obviously think that he escaped somewhere and went underground. So they look for him.
Mm-hmm.
Not with much success. It's only on the 23rd of September 1934, so we're talking a year after the murder, that he's arrested in Barcelona in Spain.
Right.
Waiting for the extradition from Spain, the police interviews his acquaintances,
Okay.
and they manage to somehow fit what they know of the murder with what they're told by these people. So, for example, one of them said that he lent a sailor's outfit to Paul,
Okay.
and he never returned it. So they say, here we go. That's what he was wearing on the day of the murder.
Right.
Another one said that he lent him a beard cue, and he never returned it. So again, see, murder weapon, we found it. So they do that with pretty much everything they're told by these people.
I'm amused that that must be it must be made of ebony or something, because there's no way pool cue would be hit off of someone's head.
But old ones
17.
were quite hard. I remember my grandparents had a billiard table, and they were very hard pieces of wood, and the balls were ivory.
Yeah.
So maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
But they found no trace of it at the crime scene anyway. There was no wood splinter, nothing. No trace really that it was ever there. And also, somebody walking on a billiard cue in the street would be a bit strange.
Yeah.
It would have to have been broken first.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. So, anyway, they're happy because they found the murder weapon, they found the outfit, they found everything, so it's clearly him.
No, they're trying to shoehorn.
Yeah. And instead of trying to solve the murder, they're
Yeah.
trying to find things that fit the description of the murder.
Yeah.
But Paul proclaims his innocence, obviously, says it's not him.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Not surprising.
he's brought to trial, which starts on the 21st of October 1935, so
Right.
2 years after the murder. He's accused of murder with premeditation, which in the US is murder one.
Uh-huh.
When the judge reads the accusations at the start of the trial, it's very hard to distinguish what applies to Paul, what applies to Oscar, and what applies to homosexuals in general. It's essentially a long list of bad things homosexuals do. So clearly the trial doesn't start very well.
It's already started on a kind of bad foot and very judgmental.
Yeah, well, it's more than judgmental. They already have decided what was going to happen next.
Yeah, it's a foregone conclusion.
Yeah, they've decided that he was guilty.
He's guilty,
and they would make it so, and that's pretty much it. And they decided because he was homosexual, because Oscar was homosexual, and that was it.
Yeah.
So that's how the trial starts. Unfortunately, police has no proof whatsoever of anything. They don't have a single clue to show to the trial. So, for example, they collected fingerprints in Oscar's office.
Yep.
They're not Paul's. They don't know whose they are, but they're not his.
So they have hard evidence that it wasn't him.
They, in fact, have hard evidence that it wasn't him, yeah. Also, his motivation is a bit fuzzy because he was never known to have any beef against Oscar. He knew him, obviously, he was a lover, but that's about it. That's not enough to be a murderer. But they somehow decide that, yes, that's why.
It's him, yeah.
Him.
Uh-huh.
So what the police does is they rely on witnesses. So they bring a whole bunch of people, but because it's people they found in the wrong places, they discredit each other by accusing, during the trial, each other of crimes.
Right.
So that doesn't go well for the police at that point.
No.
Also, they bring a prisoner who was in jail with Paul, awaiting trial, who says that Paul confessed to him to the murder.
Oh, I think you can check that in the have that in the list of people who make false claims about doing murders and doing various crimes to the people who shouldn't be believed. Jailbirds will say anything. They're such unreliable witnesses.
And this one was in jail for having killed a cop. So it's not likely that he's going to help the police.
No,
he's
definitely
only helping himself.
No, exactly.
So the defense has no problem discrediting him.
Yeah.
The weird thing is, Michael, who is Paul's brother, tries to provide alibis for him.
Oh, okay. Tries to provide alibis.
But yes, he asks a number of people they both know to say that Paul was with them on certain dates.
That's a bit dodgy.
It's a bit dodgy. Lots of them refuse. Some accept, but it turns out at the trial that, yes, they're lying. And they eventually say, yes, I was asked to say that. Now, there's a shoemaker, I think, that was interviewed and originally said, yeah, I met him in Rouen on that date, and yeah, it was with me. And after a while, after I've been questioned by the defense, he said, no, I was asked by Michael to say that. It wasn't with me. I haven't seen them in months. So that doesn't work. That's
not great for the defense.
It's not great for the defense. And that made me wonder whether it was some kind of double bluff plan. That Michael didn't want to have Paul out of prison, but in fact wanted to send him for murder to prison. And I discovered later that Paul had stolen Michael's wife.
Okay. So Michael was more helping in between inverted commas.
Yes, he was obviously, to me, he was obviously providing fake alibis that would be found out as being fake so that Paul would go to jail. He risked going to prison himself. The judge at some point threatened him to send him to prison for perjury and providing fake alibis. He didn't, but he was arrested.
Yeah.
But then he was released. So he risked something fairly important there, but to me it sounds like that's what he's doing. He's trying on purpose to have bad alibis to trap his brother.
It's almost like he was getting paid from the prosecution at that point. Giving dodgy alibi.
It would have looked the same if it had been,
Yeah.
But then the defense calls a whole bunch of employees of the palace and other places where Oscar was working, and none of them, not a single one of them, said that Paul was the sailor. They all said, no, it doesn't look at all like the sailor. It's not him.
It's amazing to think this came to trial. What a complete and utter farce.
Yes, totally. It only lasted 3 days as well.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous. The police had nothing to start with, and everything they tried just fell on its face, essentially.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Then it becomes clear that there's absolutely nothing in the case. There's no proof that Paul was even involved in any way, or even there's no proof that he was around at the time.
Mm.
He can't prove where he was because he doesn't have a good alibi, but the police can't prove that he was there either anyway.
They're saying, well, there seems to be an awful lot more evidence that it wasn't him than it was.
Yeah. So the whole case was just about who Paul and Oscar were and their way of life. That's pretty much the whole case. That was just about that, a
moral statement on their lifestyle, wasn't it?
Yeah. Mm. And at the end of the trial, I suspect in an attempt to make something stick, the prosecution says they're not opposed to a lesser sentence.
Yeah.
A smaller sentence and a smaller jail period because of Oscar, because of who he was. That's how they describe it. So essentially, he was gay, he was killed. Yeah, that's kind of okay. Don't send that dude for too long to prison. That's essentially what they're saying.
That's disgusting.
It is, yes. And they're clearly desperate to make anything stick at all.
They want to off of their books. They want to solve it, but trying to say any life is any more valuable than any other is reasonably deplorable.
Yeah. So eventually, after 3 days of trial, the trial finishes, and the jury, after 25 minutes of deliberation, acquits Paul.
Oh, thank goodness for that. I'm glad it was that quick as well.
Yeah, there's just nothing against him. And there was clapping in the room when the sentence was, the results of the judgment were read.
Bet the judge didn't like that.
The judge probably didn't like that. No, I don't think so. So in conclusion, after 2 years of investigation, after a 50,000 franc reward for any kind of information, the police never found the murderer.
Uh-huh.
They never found the murder weapon.
Sad.
They never admitted that the sailor could be fake.
Yeah.
And many people were still happy with the outcome of the trial in the newspapers, especially the right-wing newspapers. They said that, Paul Labrie maybe was the murderer, maybe not. It doesn't really matter because Oscar got what he deserved.
Wow.
So pretty much everybody was happy with that anyway. So clearly the prejudice that the police had completely derailed the investigation because they never tried to find more than what they had decided originally would be the case. And the murderer got away with it. We never knew who it was and we never knew.
That's a sad story.
And ironically, the palace in the 80s became the place for the gay community.
Well, good. I'm glad. And I think the moral of the story is life sometimes is a cabaret. It's a very dangerous one.